Rob, welcome back. We have a full plate of questions for you here today.
Yeah, there was a lot of last minute questions, so I'm kind of taking this almost as if it were a live shark bites because some of these I haven't prepared for. But let's try them anyway.
No problem. I'm really curious about this first one. It comes from Naza, who says, for Rob, Charles Atkins stated that the governing council size may be expanded to 100 or 120 members. That's three times more than the initial targeted size. If we're taking so long to fill 39 members, how can we fill 120 members? What are your opinions on the expansion? Cheers. Rob, again, I was really curious about this one. It was something that Charles made it clear that he doesn't know if something like that would actually happen, but just the fact that he threw it out there, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's nothing currently that would enable the 39 council members to expand to 120, and I certainly there is no intent to do that, as far as I'm aware. And as part of the leadership team, I think I would be aware. The LLC agreement is, it says 39, it states 39, and we're currently not there. So I think it's only hypothetical that the council would expand anywhere beyond 39. It would require a vote of the council to do that. So, but what Charles I think is saying, because the council hosts the nodes, right? They host the network. And I can foresee a time in the not too distant future where we do need to expand the network consensus operators beyond 39. There will be a need to extend that, maybe 100, 120, let's say, as that first stage of, the next stage of decentralization. We talked about in the past about what happens to council members when they've completed their term on the council and roll off, and yet they still want to host a node. So that's kind of a natural extension, I guess, of the network. When we have a full council and the pipeline of new members is coming in, that it would be natural to allow them to host nodes, maybe not a consensus node, but some of the other nodes, in order to get up the learning curve, as it were, and participate in some form or other. And I think I see that happening as well. So, I don't think there's moving towards having a governing council of 100 plus members, because, of course, council do network governance and they do corporate governance. And getting a decision on corporate governance is actually quite difficult. The bigger the organization, the harder it is to achieve consensus. But the network governance perspective and the hosting the network and hosting the node and participating in the committees in the way that they're currently set up, which is in an observer and contribution but non-voting role other than the voted for members. I mean, I could see that potentially expanding. But I think what Charles really means is that through this next phase, once the council is full, we would potentially need an additional capability to both onboard and offboard council members. So that extends the network, plus potentially including node operators and node hosts and from other organizations that don't necessarily fulfill the central governing council criteria, but also want to participate in the network in some other form. So I could foresee that happening. If that's what Charles meant, then I'm in total agreement with him.
All right, well, we'll see. I actually don't think it's a horrible idea to expand the actual council. It would be, of course, harder to manage, but to have a council of 100 or 120 different members, it would just make Hedera this juggernaut, I think, as far as these distributed
It's
ledgers.
difficult. Yeah, it's difficult to. If you think of it as an industry association across sectors, across geographies, across time zones, with limited terms, which is exactly what it is by design, and it provides that level of decentralized trust. Just because of that, the bigger it grows, the harder it is to manage. But that's not a reason not to do it, because that's at the heart of decentralization. So that, I guess, the real question is what happens over time to the council as it truly decentralizes. Are we talking about concentric rings, or are we talking about an evolution into some kind of DAO or what? I don't know. If we've got 100-year to a 100-year network, then I suspect it will evolve over that time as well. But from where we stand at the moment, we're going to fill the 39, and we're kind of actively talking about what comes next in terms of on-ramping and off-ramping, and the potential for other kind of community node hosts.
All right. Well, I'll see if I can get some more clarification from Charles as to exactly what he meant. Maybe we can drill into it here in the weeks to come. All right. So the next one comes from HBAR J, who says the crypto space has had a number of recent positive developments. What are currently the biggest headwinds facing Hedera when it comes to driving adoption?
Oh, I mean, this is a great question. It's a perennial question. It's the one that, is constantly on my mind. I mean, specifically about adoption here. I mean, although we can talk about regulation, we can talk about, many other things. But, I want to take this question as being usage, utility. And I actually think we are seeing a lot of potential projects very close, not even potential, actual projects, but very close to the main net. And that utility is a surge, an upswelling that is, I'm seeing everywhere. The conversations that we had at HederaCon, the conversations I'm hearing on the booths and the stands at ETH Denver, the projects that I am aligned with, they're all kind of at that stage in their life cycle where the technology is being proven to the point that actually now it's just commercial decisions about how to go the last mile and how to scale up. So I think that has been the headwind. That's been the headwind. I know it's a cliche, but we're still early. Even 8-9 years in for Hedera. And we've learned a lot of lessons on the way. The fact that we've now got Hiero. Hiero opens up, through the Linux Foundation, opens us up to millions of developers worldwide that are, very familiar with working with open source through the Linux Foundation. So that's something which is going to be and is being driven through developer relations and engagement and hackathons, and that's a headwind that has been removed largely through being the only public layer one on the Linux Foundation decentralized trust project. So we've got that. We've got at the other end of the spectrum, I guess, we've got hash spheres coming, launch announcements and everything, if not this week, very soon around that. So we're participating in that beta program. So I'm quite excited about what that does in terms of getting enterprise across the line from Web 2 into Web 2.5 and then ultimately into Web 3. So that's a headwind that's, we've seen from confidentiality and privacy and all the other pushbacks that enterprise has. We've had headwinds related to ecosystem integrations, which are unnecessary in Web 3. So we're talking about custodial wallets and bridges, oracles, stablecoin issuance. So we're seeing all of those things now kind of being addressed as well, and being addressed at speed, at pace. So those headwinds are dropping as well. So we've had a lot of headwinds over the last few years, but they've been recognized. I think Charles going to the foundation has changed the target areas for the foundation to remove those challenges that we've had, following the Web3 playbook, as he talks about, that the other successful layer ones have followed. And now we're addressing, developer ecosystem growth and ecosystem integrations, and targeting the native builders as well, and supporting the native builders before we do the big flagship use cases. And we've got a few of those as well, right? So all of those things come together all at once. And, the regulatory change, not just in the US, but globally, will kind of switch those headwinds to tailwinds, gives us removes a lot of the inhibitions to move. And each jurisdiction is slightly different, but the builders in those jurisdictions will have the tools, they'll have the integrations, they'll have the support, and they'll have the headwinds removed. And then we'll be off to the races.
That's what we're hoping for. All right, so the next one is another one on the Hedera Governing Council. It comes from DK33, who asks, is there still the same criteria to join the council as there was a year ago? First, it was just join, then the potential company needed to have a use case ready to go. And now, has there been a change to that? An addition, edit, or a deletion? So, Rob, this is a good question. I don't think I've heard anything about any changes to the criteria around potential governing council members, but do you have any insights?
No, there's been no change. I think, and from the beginning, there's always been an intent that the candidates for governing council not only meet the criteria for joining, so they've got to be the equivalent of a Fortune 20 in their sector or in their country, or if they're an NGO or academic organization, they're in that kind of top of the leaderboard. So there's always been that criterion. We've always had the use case intent, so they're not just tourists. But of course, at the beginning, they have the big logos actually served a purpose as well. So over the last year, in fact, probably the last 18 months or so, there's been a real tightening of that. There's a recognition that council membership, not only as the governing body and the need to contribute to network and corporate governance, one has to do that demonstrably as well. So one has to have a use case. One has to kind of know, needs skin in the game, right? Because that's what makes it sticky. That's what makes that council member sticky. It makes them want to continue to contribute after their term expires as well. Like I was just saying with the node hosting. So I think there's been a greater focus on that aspect of the candidacy and the going through membership committee. Certainly, every single one of the most recent batch and those that are coming this year, that's front and center of the conversation about whether they're fit to join the council or not. And some very good ones, some very good logos have been, sidelined or declined because the use case isn't strong enough. So I think there'll be a lot of, they'll probably never come to light, but that process does work, and it's for a reason. And I know there's frustration about there not being the consistent announcements that the community expects, but it's all for the right reasons. We want to fill the council with a group of companies that are and other organizations that have viable use cases that will get to production and actually contribute to the good of the whole. And that's that's worth taking time over. Sure, but they're coming.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to hear. So next, we're going to get into some micropayment stuff. I know this is one of your favorite topics. The first one comes from Acelo, who asks, what's it going to take to make daily timestamp a reality? It was brought up at HederaCon, such an amazing use case and strategic. We could have a financial publication like the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal be on the governing council and advertise Hedera to the financial world at the same time. So for anybody that doesn't know, the daily timestamp was actually before open access. So the HBAR had been launched, there was a network, but not everybody could use the network. But Hedera did put together this thing called the daily timestamp, where you could read articles and get paid in HBAR. So the opposite of what we're looking to happen now, where you might have content that's put out by one of those publications, the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, and you pay a small amount of a stablecoin or some other cryptocurrency to go ahead and read that article or take in whatever media it might be. So this was something that we knew was possible. There was the proof of concept going back all the way to 2019, but we really haven't seen any of that, even though there's several teams that are working on it. We haven't seen it really come to fruition in a big way. What are some of the things that we need to do to get something like that to actually come to market?
I mean, that's a really OG question, isn't it, from Ace?
It is.
And we do refer to it from time to time. And so I'm pretty well placed to answer this question, actually, because we took the daily timestamp and FPOS implemented it as our micropayments proof of concept. That was one of the first things that we did with Hedera. I mean, we added some additional bells and whistles around digital identity and tested the payment transactions with identity payloads or credentials, and also the other way around. So, an identity transaction, an interaction of proof of identity, but with a payment payload attached. And that was super interesting. But we did it within the context of what the daily timestamp was seeking to achieve. So pay per page as an innovation, as a disruption of the current kind of media models where you're either the product because you're being advertised to, or you've got subscriptions. And the examples given in the question, subscription models where many people are resistant to multiple subscriptions to online media. I guess with the exception of stream media, which, looking at my bank account, seems to be take the lion's share of the discretionary spend across Netflix and Disney Plus and Prime and all the rest. But the access to media and pay per page was a really interesting one for us. What we found, though, was because we were trying to work with the existing media organizations and websites, such as it wasn't the Financial Times, but more local published media online. Their commercial models, their business models, were so ingrained, were so structured around subscription and advertising that they weren't open to the disruption. They didn't want to be disrupted. And so one of the and when you run a proof of concept, you have a hypothesis that you're seeking to prove or otherwise. And part of that is this industry ready for disruption, or does an entirely new kind of industry have to evolve with using this technology? And we came to the conclusion that actually the old media industry, wasn't ready for this level of disruption, and that new forms of media would have to develop that took streamed value for streamed content. And then we moved on from that particular proof of concept into many other proofs of concept and pilots. But I think it's a very interesting outcome. It's a very interesting question as well, of course. I mean, we see with Drop tackling similar approaches, and there are projects that are seeking to use Drop that have the same principles of pay per page, or pay per track, or pay per any other small unit of value. So I think we are developing a way of moving around the traditional media outlets into a way that is truly disruptive, and maybe the daily timestamp will become a real thing once all the infrastructure is in place. And I think having things like stablecoins integrated is really important, because having the ability to pay in fiat with something like a stablecoin, like a USDC, on Hedera with easy on ramps and off ramps is a key enabler for those sorts of use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we have to get some of these technologies like Drop to become more ubiquitous, more well used on the internet. People need to become familiar with them. And then it might be a lot easier to have some of these use cases come to fruition.
Absolutely.
The other thing is, we have a lot more independent content creators out there that might be more open to this kind of thing. So we'll see as time goes on. But this actually dovetails well into the next question. Lewis asks, what are the most innovative micropayments use cases that you've discovered or heard about in 2025 that are or should switch to using Hedera?
When you start considering micropayments truly at the micro level, so I think of it as sub-cent payments, right? I mean, if MasterCard considers it to be $10, I think, or paying for a coffee. For me, that isn't. You need settlement finality at a cent or sub-cent level, I think, for it to actually make sense to be a micropayment, and commercially viable as well, of course. So that leads you to different architectures. You might go with HCS for it to be at 100% with an AppNet architecture or some other form of architecture which uses HCS, potentially with HIT 991, which we might talk about later. But there's that architecture. Or there's use of Hedera token service, obviously at 0.1%, but with a lot more rich kind of features and stable coins and all the rest of it. So you pick and choose your architectures. Of course, there are other types of architecture that you could build around smart contracts or layer twos, but we'll stick to those two. That leads you to very different use cases. So the original use cases and ones I've talked about and written about in the past around foundational infrastructure for smart cities, for example, where value, money, if you like, flows like any other utility. So that could be like data or electricity or power, water. When you've got pipes that flow like that, then you can actually plug into them and use them in other ways. So you could, like I said earlier, you can stream content, you can stream services in return for streamed value. I think that's very, very interesting and a very different way of looking at how we pay for things and how commerce will develop over time. The extension of that is Internet of Things. So when you have not people, but you have devices that have been enabled or empowered by one's identity, one's digital identity, to make microtransactions on one's behalf for things that they need to do or they're interested in or those devices are focused on. That might be one's autonomous vehicle, or it might be one's drone, or it might be one's fridge. I mean, all of those things, I wouldn't imagine those three things interacting with the environment and other things in order that my prerequisites for that interaction take place, and that might be incentivized through payments. And because it's a volume play, and because it's within the context of these smart cities where the pipes flow very very quickly, that would be a kind of utopian future, if you like, which we're just starting on. However, and the question talks about 2025. Those things are developing. So we are talking about drones and Neuron and DeepIn with ways of incentivizing devices to behave in particular ways. We have, coined the phrase transactional Internet of Things. The transaction in the transactional Internet of Things are micropayments. That is the interaction between devices which incentivizes behavior. So those things are real now. They're actually developing. And now, of course, we've got AI agents. So we've got internet physical infrastructure and decentralized physical infrastructure and IoT on one side, and we've got actors within the online space that have that are AI based, so agents. Agentic interactions can also be incentivized. So there is very, very probably very, very soon the concept of agents owning wallets. And I could have agents, a whole legion of agents that have an associated wallet or account that is funded, and they know how to spend that that value on behalf of me or on behalf of the organization in a particular way. So the evolution in this space is incredibly fast. And so for 2025, transactional Internet of Things on one side and agentic payments or microtransactions are, I think, the two most exciting developments, and probably on a convergent path as well. So, IoT that are controlled by agents with wallets that incentivize behavior would lead us to the next evolution of this. And I can't think of any other network, any other trust layer that will operate at the scale that is required for those sorts of interactions.
Fascinating.
And that's Hedera, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really fascinating stuff. So Lewis actually had another one. First, before I get into that question, when is the next Hedera Governing Council meeting?
The next in-person meeting is June, beginning of
June.
June,
Okay.
in
And
Washington.
the next regular meeting. What about the next?
Well, we have
Just
quarterly meetings now, so that's
oh, okay.
that's the next one. Yeah.
That's the next one. All right. So Lewis was just wondering, what's your goal to achieve at that next Hedera Governing Council meeting?
Well, I don't. The chair, the council chair, sets the agenda of those council meetings. So I don't know what that is. They typically the in-person meetings are over 2 days. They take the fairly standard agenda, which is usually the presentation by the ecosystem partners on updates and reports. We have then we get into network governance, so there'll be reports from each of the committees and on how they're tracking to their objectives. So each committee has an annual set of objectives that have been approved by the governing council, and they then report against those. So that's how we govern the network. We have reports from the LLC as well. So the node operation and all that good stuff. So that's where we tend to do a lot of the work. And then we almost always have breakout sessions as well. So there'll be 2 or 3 breakout sessions which have themes du jour that will attract different council members in different ways. So that might be. I mean, last year we had. Last time we had an AI breakout session, we had a tokenization breakout session, we had Hedera for Good. So those are the sorts of big themes that you get all of these minds focused on, which then contribute and help not only strategic thinking for the council as a whole, but also that filters into use cases. That sometimes there are actions coming out of those working groups and owners that kind of drive different working groups forward. So the AI working group was formed out of one of those sessions. So there's a lot of activity. What happens? I suspect there'll be a lot of discussion around, because we're in Washington at a time when Congress is sitting, at a time when we've had nearly 6 months of the new administration. So I think that'll take a lot of the focus of the council. But of course, we're a global council, so I'm particularly interested in the rest of the world and how we maintain that balance between the very noisy agenda coming out of the US now, and how we continue to be grown-ups and oversee the development of the network in a truly decentralized way.
It'll be interesting to watch. All right, so the next couple I'm going to probably take here, we've answered them a few times, so you can probably have a break. It comes from Uncle Stugatz, who I messed up the name last time. He's going to mention it here, but we got it right this time. If I recall correctly from the tokenomics in the white paper, the governing council can vote to increase the total supply of HBAR. Is this correct? If so, why would they do this? Also, so much love for getting to my question last week. My name is pronounced Stugatz. You the man. Also, on my staking rewards, every day it seems to get smaller by 0.001 HBAR. Why does this happen? So to take the first part of the question, yes, all of these networks have the ability to make changes. So in the case of Bitcoin, they have the Bitcoin improvement proposals. If those go to the point where they're actually going to try to implement it, the miners or all the different miners out there have to approve it. So really with Bitcoin, I don't know how decentralized it is as far as miners right now, but I know at one point you just needed to get 3 miners on board to make a change, and they could actually change the supply of Bitcoin. Now, of course, that would be very unpopular. It would be very difficult to get the miners to agree to something like that, but they do have that mechanism to make that change. In the case of Hedera, what they've done is different things need to meet certain milestones, whether that's a simple majority, a super majority in the Hedera Governing Council. For certain things, like changing the supply, adding to the supply, or reducing the supply of HBAR, it would take a unanimous vote across the board. Now, just like with Bitcoin, that would be very contentious, so it would be hard to get something like that to pass, even a simple majority, let alone getting a unanimous decision. And the only permanent governing council member, Swirlds, is a permanent no from what they've said. So to change that, that's an unbelievably high bar. I would say it's impossible to change the supply. Now, there are other networks that it is easier to change, and there are some other instances where cryptos have increased the supply, usually to get additional funding. But I'm hoping that by the time we're getting to the point where all of these different entities have reached the end of their runway, we have enough revenue coming through the fees that we don't really have to worry about it. So I think, and of course, at that point, we could tighten our belts as well. But we have a fair amount of treasury still in all of these different entities that give us plenty of runway to continue doing what we're doing for some time before that becomes an issue. The other question was around, why are my staking rewards reducing? That's pretty simple. The amount of HBAR that was initially put into account 800, which all of the staking rewards are paid from, all came from the HBAR Foundation. And it's been dwindling down since then. And due to the algorithm, the lower that number gets, the less in HBAR is paid out. So that's why it's going down, unless the fees that are generated, that 10% that goes into account 800, start to overcome that, and that number starts going back up again, or it gets funded by somebody like the HBAR Foundation again, which hasn't happened in some time. It's not going to go back up. It's going to continue to go down until we get to that sustainability point, or it gets refunded. So, Rob, I'm going to leave it right there, unless you have anything you want to add to it.
No, nothing more to add. 50 billion is the number. No, there's no intent by the council to change that.
All right, sounds good. The next one comes from Zap Madness, who asks, I genuinely want to know, what is the purpose of being a governing council member if you're not using the Hedera network for a use case? Targeting BitGo here, obviously. Now, I think that BitGo has been a fantastic governing council member, very engaged. I love a lot of the things that they're working on right now. I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about here. I know BitGo was involved with the stablecoin that I guess the Trump entity is putting out, something along those lines. That might have something to do with it, or there might be some other use case that came out where they're using another network. But of course, with somebody or an entity like BitGo, they're going to be agnostic to the chains, even though they are really interested and engaged with Hedera and may use it for certain things. It's not going to be every single thing that comes out. But what are your thoughts there, Rob?
Yeah, this is really unfair on BitGo. I mean, I addressed the use case issue earlier. I think I don't need to kind of go into in any more detail. But I would love, as the chair of the Network Utilization Committee that's keenly focused on these things, I would love every council member to be building on Hedera. That's my intention. And I think over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot more of that. There's a lot more going on than people see, actually. The enterprise program run by the Hashgraph Association has quite a number of council members running through it. So the community doesn't see everything, right? And so I think it's not as bad as some people make out, but it could be better, right? And we do have council members who need to be helped, supported to be building on the network, which is fine, right? And it's in progress. In terms of BitGo, we're one of the first custodial wallets to integrate with HBAR and HTS. They provide the background technology for 40% or more, I think, of the world's centralized exchanges, which makes it easier to onboard some of these exchanges, and that's in train as well. Frank Wang, who's the primary representative of BitGo on the council, is also a board member, so he contributes his time towards the corporate governance as well as the network governance. BitGo are very engaged in conversations. They participate in the committees, and they're supporting other governing council members as well in terms of their custodial wallets. So I think look somewhere else if you want to target a council member for not building, not BitGo. They're very engaged, and Frank is very vocal as well. I mean, similar to how Duncan Moyer used to be. They're very happy to get on a panel or talk about Hedera, and because of his wider focus across the Web3 space, it's a lot more compelling to hear his support for Hedera. So I think we need more of those on the council, more Web3 companies, more very clear advocates and users. And they don't all have to be building specific use cases. In terms of the stablecoin, I think that's probably where the question came from, because stablecoin, the BitGo stablecoin, isn't yet issued on Hedera. As far as I understand it, they are doing that under the New York Bit license, and the rules of the Bit license require the network to be presented, and there's all sorts of hoops to jump through on every single one of the networks that you're issuing, and each one is a bit of an arduous process. And so I think it's natural that they would, and I don't know which networks the BitGo stablecoin is currently issued on, but you'd start with the ones that are most likely to get across the line and then move to the other ones. And that's the reason we're not seeing that just yet, but I think it's probably only a matter of time.
All right, Rob, is there anything else that you're excited about or you want to cover this week?
Well, as always, there's so much going on in the Hedera ecosystem. But I did engage on X last week on Wes Geisenberger's announcement. He and Hanya Othman from the Sustainable Impact team were in the Eastern African Carbon Conference. And they had a couple of announcements which were very interesting to me personally, because I'm a big Guardian fan. One of those things was the announcement of the partnership with a company called Zeptagon. And Zeptagon have been building carbon registry platforms and carbon and sustainability solutions for some time. They've worked very closely with some of the developing world governments, with the UNDP. And what they've done is they've open sourced their full registry stack, pre-integrated with Guardian, or they will next month. Actually, it's announcements next month. Now they're currently working with the likes of Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Vietnam, Ivory Coast, and a bunch of other nations that need registry platforms. So, given the need, and the rest of the world is still focusing and targeting net zero over a period of time, notwithstanding what's happening in the US. So, it's got to be remembered that that's still a significant drive across the rest of the planet. And we've got all of these governments now building on open source technology that will be pre-integrated with Guardian. So I actually had a call with Zeptagon a couple of days ago just to find out more. And I'm super impressed with that team. Obviously, they've got the trust of Wes and the Sustainable Impact team. They've got the trust of the UN and the UNDP in terms of implementation. So I'm looking to try and partner them with other projects who are seeking to create not only registry platforms but other Guardian integrations, because open source is the way. Guardian's open source, Hiro's open source, so these all come together quite nicely, and it's a government level application. So that gets us in with the right teams across many governments that then kind of know about Hedera, and we'll start looking at other ways of leveraging that technology. So I think it's a really big development. It's a big advancement in the Guardian ecosystem, but also, we can look to things like cross-border payments and tokenization, which is also clearly aligned with what we're doing with Guardian as well. So I think that's quite a big development that, unless you tease it apart, you don't see the importance of it.
Well, I've been really impressed with what I'm seeing coming out of our refi space. That interview that I did with Dovu and those other teams last week on the agroforestry project was really impressive. I'm looking forward to following that. They actually wanted to have me do an interview with them in the field and showing exactly what they're doing. So we're going to try to do that in the future as well.
Cool.
So it's certainly, as you say, Rob, it's a space to keep an eye on. All right, so that's pretty much all we have for this week. I appreciate everybody dropping your questions down below. If you have anything you're curious about for the Hedera ecosystem or the HBAR economy. Rob, thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
My pleasure. See you next week.